asked me to walk across in the snow on the ice, but I also want to thank you for letting me drive this half mile, which I've never made it this way. It's the first time, so it's good to be here. I've known Pastor Sam and Sunny. We have known them for a while through the work of IET. Before they came here, heard about them, and they are family to us, and it's good to be in this church. Many of you, I know some of you by face, but don't know your name, but Bob Winkle, and the rest of you have known you for a long time. Good to be here. Before I start, can you guys tell me who was the first king of Israel? Saul. Who was the second king? David, that's right. And there was a connection between Saul and David. There was somebody who was very close to David who was also related to Saul. Do you remember who that was? It was Jonathan. I think I heard someone say that. It's Jonathan. Jonathan was the son of Saul. He was also David's best friend. And the story is in the book of 2 Samuel, or in the book of Samuel, but 2 Samuel, it talks about their relationship. And what I want to talk to you today is about Jonathan's son. Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth. Funny name. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I think it's Mephibosheth. And if you go to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 4, and I know for children you probably, I don't know how much of an attention span you have with verses, but if you go to chapter 4, verse 4, it says, Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth, who was crippled as a child. He was 5 years old when Saul and Jonathan were killed at the Battle of Jezreel. When news of the battle reached the capital, the child's nurse grabbed him and fled, but she fell and dropped him as she was running, and he became crippled as a result. You know what happened was, Saul and his children, including Jonathan, went to battle. They were battling the Philistines. And they all got killed. So since Saul and Jonathan got killed, can you think why they would want to... So now David is a king. David becomes a new king. Because Saul was the king, he died. And now David becomes a king. Can you imagine why they might want to take this baby, Jonathan's baby Mephibosheth? The nurse takes him and she runs with him. And as she's running, she falls, the baby falls. And as a result of the accident, the child is crippled. Do you know why the nurse would do that? Why the nurse would try to grab the child and run? Say that again? So David won't kill him. Exactly. Exactly. Because now Mephibosheth was the heir to the throne. And David was afraid that later on, Mephibosheth, when he grows up, he'll come back and take the throne. So that's the story of Mephibosheth. That's how Mephibosheth comes into the scene. And if you continue on, about 20 years later, in 2 Samuel chapter 9, so 20 years later, verse 3 to 11, David calls Ziba. Ziba is a servant of Saul. David calls Ziba forward and he asks this question, is anyone still alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them in any way I can. Ziba replied, yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive, but he is crippled. Where is he? The king asked. In Lodabar, Ziba told him, at the home of Mahir, son of Amiel. Not Abiel, Amiel. So David sent for him and brought him from Machir's home. His name was, remember the name? Mephibosheth. Can you remember that? It's kind of difficult, isn't it? He was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. When he came to David, he bowed low in great fear and said, I am your servant. But David said, don't be afraid. I have asked you to come so that I can be kind to you because of my vow to your father Jonathan. I will give you all the land that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you may live here with me at the palace. Mephibosheth fell to the ground before the king. Should the king show such kindness to a dead dog like me, he exclaimed. Then the king summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said, I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and servants are to farm the land for him to produce food for his family. But Mephibosheth will live here at the palace with me. Ziba, who had 15 sons and 20 servants, replied, Yes, my lord, I will do all that, as you have commanded. And this is important. From that time on, Mephibosheth ate regularly with David as though he were one of his sons. You know, at age 5, the child was dropped, if you remember, and he became crippled. It's 20 years later now. David is now king of Israel, right? For 20 years. Very successful king. The kingdom grew like 10 times what it was before he started. He had won every battle there was. He had not lost a battle yet. The kingdom was at peace. So David is doing great 20 years later. And he remembers something. He remembers a vow that he made to his friend Jonathan. That vow, the two of them, Jonathan and David, they were best friends. And in 1 Samuel chapter 20, they talk about the vow. And it says, so Jonathan is talking to David. He says, if I die, treat my family with this faithful love, even when the Lord destroys all your enemies. So Jonathan made a covenant with David, saying, may the Lord destroy all your enemies. And Jonathan made David reaffirm or promise his vow of friendship again. For Jonathan loved David as much as he loved himself. Jonathan had made this promise long time ago, before Mephibosheth was on the scene. And he, and at 25, and after Mephibosheth was born, 25 years later, David is hugely successful. He's going around looking at his armies, and he remembers a promise that he made to his friend Jonathan. And he calls his friend, this servant of Ziba, called Ziba, who is Saul's servant. And he asks him, is there anyone alive in the family? And Ziba says, yes, there is a guy. He's crippled, but he lives far away in this place called Lodebar. Another funny name, there are a lot of these funny names there. And so he says, so David sends his men to go and get Mephibosheth and bring him over. There is, how many of you have heard of the word, you've heard of the word grace, haven't you? Not Auntie Grace, but you've heard of the word grace? Do you know what grace means? Somebody say.
Giving something when you're not worthy.
Something, you get something you're not worthy, that you don't deserve? Something good that happens to you, maybe? I think they call it, I think some of the theology guys will say it's called unmerited favor. It's sort of like, if your parents, if you were bad to your siblings, if you were not nice that day, and your parents, instead of giving you a timeout, they say, we'll take you to Brahms and give you an ice cream. You didn't deserve that ice cream. And that is grace. You didn't deserve it, but you got something because of your parents' kindness. It's not because of something you did. And You know, that verse in 2 Samuel, that verse that we read, it says that Mephibosheth got to eat at the table with David as though he were one of his own sons. He ate regularly with David at the table. You know, it's sort of like one of the preachers I like a lot. His name is Chuck Swindoll, and he has this. He gives this analogy, or not analogy, but he talks about this is what draw this picture. Okay, there's a big dining table in the palace, and in the palace are David, the king. He's sitting there, and next to him are all his children. You know, among his children is this woman that his daughter, that the Bible says is beautiful. Her name is, remember, Tamar. Also, there was a man that the Bible says, his son, who was so handsome. And it says he was a perfect specimen of a man. Do you know what his name was? Clement, that's right. It's Coco, isn't it? That's right. No, his name was Absalom. Absalom. So, and there was also another guy who had a lot of wisdom. One of David's sons. Do you remember him? Solomon. That's right. And you know, you could also imagine probably was, you know, David had never lost a battle. And the commander of his army was a man by the name of Joab. These guys are all sitting on this table. All these great guys, right? All these great people. David's children, Joab, and the dinner bell rings. I want you to imagine this. And here you hear this noise. I don't know if it's true or not, but in this crutches comes this cripple walking onto the table. And he sits with all of David's children. And he gets to experience grace. He gets to experience something, not because he deserved it, not because of something he did. He got to experience it because of the goodness of King David. You know, so would that make you feel good? Would that make you feel confident? If you were sitting at that table with all these big shots, would you feel confident? Feel good? I think that's how you and I ought to feel. Because we have been given grace. You know, we sit at the table with Christ. We sit at the table with the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And we get to enjoy everything that Christ has promised us. Not because of something we did, not because of something we deserved, but because of His love. So that ought to give you some confidence. You should feel good, right? Secondly, you know, there is another story I want to tell you. There is a long time ago in the American Civil War, there was a Union soldier, who was of the Union Army, and he deserted. They accused him of deserting the army. Do you know what desertion means? He left the army. And at that time, if you left the army, they could condemn you to death. And so they condemned him to death. And President Abraham Lincoln at that time, he pardoned him. You know what pardoning means? He told him he doesn't have to die, that he would be okay. And this soldier went back to fight the battle after he was pardoned. And he fought several battles, and the last battle of the Civil War, he died. And when they went to get his body, in his pocket, on his right pocket, the breast pocket,